Check, check. Got it? Final sound check, and I think we should be good to go.
Mi innervosisco, ma veramente non mi piace se non lo sapete. Per favore. Minnesota Press. Io sono pronta, però questo non mi sembra che funzioni. Slide. Non è la prima volta che sono qui, è la seconda volta. She's a professor of communication and media studies at l'Università L'Orientale in Naples. She's author of seminal books on network culture since the beginning of the 2000s. She has been working on ideas such as the commons and network culture. I have some hiccup. No? Does it work? Okay. She recently published, why don't you come here? Yeah. She recently published After the Internet, which has been translated by Edizioni Nero in Italian, Dopo Internet, and she's now finalizing her manuscript for University of Minnesota Press called Network Social. We all look forward to this book. Last but not least, Tiziana is the initiator with us, actually, of CRIT, which is an intercultural research center composed by 4 nodes. John Cabot is one of the nodes, Orientale, of course, in Naples, and then Scuola Normale in Firenze, and Ca' Foscari in Venice. This is an inter-universitary center whose objective is to study transnational technoculture, so basically to ask questions on technology, the digital, connected to identity, politics, and society overall. This is an idea that we had before COVID, actually, where we started hosting readings between John Cabot University and L'Orientale in Naples, and I'm very happy that we finally after the COVID, managed to make it happen as an inter-university research center. We are actually going to have our first conference, a physical conference in Naples on December 9th, hosting Wendy Chan, who is a prominent software studies theorist. We also have today many members of the Comitato Scientifico, Teresa Numerico from Roma Tre University, and our own Tony Stagliano and Miriam Tola. Yes, and I have been talking too much because I want to leave the floor to Tiziana, who's going to talk about feminism after the internet, and as usual, we'll reconvene after the talk for Q&A. Thank you, Tiziana.
Thank you very much, Donatella. It's always a pleasure to be at John Cabot. This is my second time talking, discussing things, or giving a talk for students at John Cabot. Yes, it's very exciting to be in this new research center with Donatella and the other nodes, because it's been a very, we have a lot in common, and through the center, we actually been able to have, to grow the kind of collective research environment for thinking that is needed, without which you're just, a solitary thinker does not achieve much. The best things happen where people actually manage to get together and think together. You go back to what you're doing with a much stronger sense of why you're doing it and how you're doing it. So the idea was for me to come here and talk about the Italian translation of a book I published originally in English, which is After the Internet. Digital Networks Between Capital and the Common. It's a collection of essays. Was published by Semiotext. It's an honor to be published by Semiotext. It's a publisher who has a serious catalog of thinkers who have influenced many of us, Deleuze, Foucault, Baudrillard, Lyotard, and many others, funded by Sylvain Lotringer. So look at the catalog of Semiotext. It's always very inspiring. And it was translated in Italian by Nero, who's a young Italian publisher, but with a very interesting and challenging catalog as well. So I was very happy to have to go from Semiotext to Nero in an Italian context. So what is the book about and how it relates to today's talk, which was thought of in the context of the date, 25th of November. There was a big march here in Rome just a few days ago. It's a day which is about the struggle against male violence on women, or gender violence in general. And so, rightly so, I was asked to bend my talk in the direction of talking about feminism before and after, and during and after the internet. So why after the internet? Actually, the book is a collection of essays, and I wrote this essay between 2008 and 2020. And these were years where I was traveling around a lot. It was very nice. Not so much going to academic conferences as joining activist networks where politically committed to thinking about possible alternatives to the kind of economy and societies that we live in. And, they were here in Italy, but also in Europe, in the United States. So mostly Western, it's true, mostly Marxist, but there were exciting environments where to think about what was happening. And what was happening, which is what the book chronicles, is a huge transformation of something that, we used to know as the internet, which was a technology invented in the late 1960s in the United States, and then, it had expanded, and many different parts of technologies that allowed computers to connect to each other had also developed outside the internet in corporate networks, grassroots networks. But until the 2000s, it was very much a niche technology. So it was a technology that at least solicited a lot of expectations and hopes, because it was mainly compared to television and the mass media. So there was this expectation that because the internet allowed everybody to communicate, to produce content, to distribute it freely, it was going to be this huge emancipatory technology, right? So what happened is the kind of world that you have grown up with. It's a platform world, and most of these platforms started in the late 2000s after the financial crisis of 2008. And they have completely transformed the experience, the architecture, the infrastructure of digital connectivity, doing things like monetizing attention, introducing interfaces that pushed engagement, developing social plugins, changing the architecture of the old internet, which has made it what it is today. Now, this is something that many people who used to hope that the internet would be different regret, but I don't think it's all that bad, because the reality is also that the old internet was a minority medium. Had very few people used it. Most people of a certain social class, certain social groups, mostly men, not just men, as we'll see today, mostly white men, not just white men, but mostly. And today's internet is a very different beast. Maybe it's not the internet anymore, it's a corporate platform complex, but it's become a mass medium of a different kinds. And this has also had implications for the ways in which feminism as a presence acts, or with relation to how it has acted in the past. So accepting Donatella's and Miriam's solicitation of kind of making my talk about the relationship between feminism and the internet, I start with feminism before the internet. Okay, so the image you see is a famous one. It's about early computers. So it's just 70, the computers as a technology is 70, 80 years old. It's not that old. It's like your grandparents, probably, they're the same age. And computing, of course, there's a whole kind of previous work that went before the first digital computers, analog computers were assembled in the UK and the US, mostly, but not only. So this is a famous image because even if computers were to assume, and especially programming, this strong male connotation, so they're assumed to be programming is supposed to be for men. Computer engineers is traditionally a kind of male profession, but this has not always been the case, because women in the 1950s were the first programmers. They were actually the ones who operated the hardware of the machine. They were given these instructions which directed them to change the configuration of the plugs in a certain way so the machines could perform their calculations. This was a job, again, performed mostly by women in the 1950s. And this is when Chun was a software theorist Donatella was talking about, account of this connection between, early connection between programming and computers. We also have to say that the first computer programmer, again, was a woman, was Ada Lovelace Byron, Lord Byron's daughter, who was a gifted mathematician and crucially contributed to the software part of Charles Babbage difference engine, the first computer in the 1890s or before. So programming in the 1950s, before the internet, when computers were isolated machine, is described by Wendy Chun as fun and fairly gender balanced, new and hence not as lucrative as hardware design or sales. The ENIAC girls, who were themselves called computers. So there's a book by Catherine Hales, who's another renowned and very interesting theorist of cybernetics and technology, a feminist. She wrote a book entitled My Mother Was a Computer, because her own mother was one of these girls who did this job. So many female ENIAC girls were first hired as sub-professionals, but then with time, many female programmers quit to have children or get married, while men took increasingly lucrative jobs. So what Chun points out is not only that women were actually programmers Another theorist, the study plant, argued there is a strong connection between programming and weaving. We remember the first computers were inspired by looms, so by weaving technology, but also that with time, this kind of feminine disconnection between women and computers was buried in the machines. And this is something that also implicates a kind of subterranean existence of this kind of feminine association between women and computers, which she identifies in the way, the transformation that led programming to become what we know today, and software to become the kind of software that we know today. We are quite used to graphic user interfaces, which means that we can manipulate objects on the screen, or with our fingers or with a mouse. But the kind of programming usually took the form of the command line. So you would write lines of code telling the machine what to do. And so she argues that software became software and programming when commands shifted from a commanding a girl to commanding a machine. So the relationship, and this is an argument that has been made also with relation to race recently, that the kind of mastery the computer's interfaces produce, this sense that we can command them, we can get them with a swipe, we can get a package we want to turn up at our door without knowing how, the way we command Alexa, or we use robots around the house, replicates this structure. So computation depends on yes, sir, in response to short declarative sentences and imperatives that are in essence commands. So what she argues is that, she's not the only one, that within computing, within the computer, there is a kind of mode of operation of power that creates with a kind of relation with machines that is also a gendered relation and also a racialized relation. There is also a beautiful book, which I haven't read, just on the internet, and I need to get, which is called The Server. And it's a history of the relationship between the notion of the server in computing and all these designs of houses in plantation times where servants had to be invisible. So there is a strong connection between the history of computing and that of gender and race. So we get to the internet. When do we get to the internet? It starts in the late 1960s. In the 1970s, there's a whole wave of hippie countercultural investment in personal computers as a technology. The Homebrew Computer Club in San Francisco is one on the Berkeley area. It's a famous place where long-haired, bearded hippies go to exchange software tips and think together about the emancipatory potential of computing. But feminism can really becomes a visible presence on the internet really in the 1980s and 1990s. So this is the period where you have different kinds of, I think there are collectives mostly, and also books, who identify with the moniker cyberfeminism. So the 1980s and 1990s are the cyber year. So cybernetics, which was a military science, a paradigm which was hatched during World War II, and which produced this analogy between organisms and machines, but under the idea of command and control, was appropriated again by subcultural sensibilities, and especially punk. It became cyberpunk, and cyberfeminism has a strong relationship to this kind of punk ethos of the 1980s cyberculture. What was a punk subculture about was do-it-yourself, was about challenging transgression, the establishment. It was about anarchy. You know, anarchy in the UK was a famous punk, UK punk anthems. And the same spirit was like taken into these new digital spaces, which at the time were mostly text-based interfaces because of the limitations of bandwidth. There were no images on the internet. It was all text. So this text-based internet was also a space where you could have published manifestos such as Virus Matrix. Virus Matrix was a group of Australian feminists who wrote this manifesto about making a connection between feminist second wave feminism, feminist second wave theory, philosophy, like Lucy Rigarai, which was all about, you know, there was like difference, sexual difference. It was about this connection to female sexuality and eroticism. So Venus Matrix define themselves as the modern Kant, positive anti-reason, unbounded, unleashed, and unforgiving. We see art without Kant, we make art without Kant, and so on. We believe in just science, madness, holiness. So it was a punk mode of feminism. And it was about making, erupting in this mostly male space with this punk attitude of defiance and reappropriation. This was a whole cultural environment where you also started having feminist theorists like Sadie Plant with Zeros and One, uncovering this connection between computing and women, or like queer and transgender authors such as Rosanna Luker-Stone, writing about the potential of the internet to challenge gender identities overall. So the 1980s and 1990s were not just about the theories and the manifestos, but there was also interesting, quite beautiful actually in many ways, challenging cultural production. So feminism in the age of the internet, cyberfeminism, was about production of an imaginary, it was about film, was about art, you know, it's about internet art, but not just internet art. So you can see here, for example, Shulia Chang, IQ, a kind of porn, feminist, queer, cyberpunk film. She's a very prolific, active, excellent artist. I recommend you to check her work. Literature, I'm thinking about Pat Cadigan, Stinners, cyberpunk women writers, or Lynn Hirson, I have a memory, Edgman. Films, conceiving Ada and Technolust, explore the theme of artificial life from a feminist point of view. And then you also had Orlan, this French artist who experimented with plastic surgery as a kind of, you know, this punk ethic of technology, technological transformation of the body, which was also a theme at the time. So in the age of the internet, which say is the 1980s and 1990s, so why do I call it the age of the internet? Because it was possible, it was a moment where the word internet indicated not just a technology, but also an idea, an ideal. It was an ideal of possible emancipatory uses of a technology that allowed for distributed communication. And this was a real novelty at the time, because, you know, we lived in an age dominated by the mass media, by television, so to have your voice heard was still very difficult, right? So what was thought at the time was that just having access to technology that allowed you to produce, circulate, communicate to everybody how you wanted, what you wanted to do, was actually something that was going to create emancipatory possibilities. And cyberfeminism participated in that by taking space within the internet for a specific feminist aesthetics, feminist ethos, and a feminist battle against the dominant masculine style of hacking and all the other groups that dominated it at the time. Okay, I just want to remember that today, you know, this kind of aesthetic investment in aesthetics, in kind of producing an imaginary of technology, a futuristic imaginary of technology, which departs from what is now, I think, something that has been completely colonized by corporations. You know, thinking about Tesla, I'm thinking about all these images of AI and futures which are already designed according to a certain model in time. Both cyber-feminist but also Afrofuturism represented important openings for a different kind of imaginary of what technology could be. So these are more recent endeavors. So you have Black Quantum Futurism from the USA, Dirty Computer, Janelle Monáe, and this Neptune Frost, which is an African film, which I think maintain the sense of exploration of the technological imagination that cyber-feminists had more in the white cyber-feminists had more in the 1980s and 1990s. Okay, so we are after the internet, okay? So the moment, from a certain point of view, from the point of view of sequential time, where one thing comes after the other, that moment is gone. But of course, we can say that we do not completely live in sequential time. So cyberfeminism still exists, you know, the internet still exists, everything exists at the same time. But there have been changes, so something new has happened. And what has happened is that this wild technology, of course, you know, it was always part of institutions such as the university, or it was affiliated with the army, but it had an underside which was still quite untamed for some time, maybe still has. Again, there's the idea that things do not ever disappear completely, so it still has. But undoubtedly, there has been a massive development where a few corporations have taken over, become mediators of digital communication. They are giant, you know, they're so-called big tech giants. These are some of the most well-known. They're all men, as you see: Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook. They're just the most visible layer. But you also had other less known but not also powerful figures associated with technology companies. These companies own the technologies that we use daily, even now, you know, where you are typing on computers with Android, Google operating system, or macOS operating system. You have apps on your mobile phones which belong to Meta or to Alphabet or to many other of these corporations. You use them in your daily life. So what I suggest in the book, it's a provocation, of course, is that there's no, you know, we live after the internet, that we live in a corporate platform complex where we access, they use the internet as an underlying infrastructure, but actually they control most of the digital connectivity, and they have shaped it in the way that we know it today. So all the interfaces that we use, I'm thinking about social buttons, like, shares, the reactions, they were actually invented before, but they took them on and developed them extensively. I don't know if you know that every thing that you like, the like button is an instrument, is a tool that allows a database working underneath to record, the connection to all your interests, everything that you like, and this produces the kind of data that is used for curating algorithmic feeds, for profiling, for advertising and targeting. So a major transformation of digital connectivity has happened through this corporation. And we know it mostly through the term platformization. So it's becoming platform of the internet. Digital platforms are the new dominant organizational and business form of digital connectivity today. They rely on kind of cloud computing model where information, data is held in centralized server farms, and then you can access it and download it and upload it most of the time, and you have access to free services in exchange for data. Now, when this mutation became manifest, there was a period which I think it was straight after 2008, which was the time where you had this big financial crisis, where it looked like the kind of economic model that also supported this kind of capitalist investment into technology could be open to collapse. So, there was this idea that maybe the capitalist economy was encountering trouble in trying to tame this new economy. There was the digital economy, which was technology based on massive free labor of users who were producing content for the platforms. And around this time, you start having also this brief but quite intense moment, which has also produced its own kind of feminism, which was accelerationism. I don't know if you ever heard accelerationism, probably not, but I mention it here because there was a kind of a new form of feminism, a new type of feminism that was not really new, because in a sense it kind of went back to the women in computing tradition, which is expressed by the Xenofeminist Manifesto, Politics for a Nation, by Laboria Kubonix. Now, the accelerationists argue that what progressives needed to do was to get to technology, to start developing computing, digital networks in ways which would empower a form of digital communism or a common-based type of technological mode of production, that these technologies could be used for the social good rather than for private accumulation, that actually the fact that they had been hijacked by capitalist corporations meant that they had not fulfilled their true potentials. And the true potential was to support a democratic decision-making, was to produce a new infrastructure of care, to change things like the health service provision, to change even the household, this was what the Xenofeminist Manifesto proposed, that you could develop technology to change the very form of the household which had been oppressive to women, make it into something collective where responsibilities could be shared. That progressive, on the one hand, the left, but also feminists had to rediscover technology and invest in technological imagination, get into computing, get to development, and make it into something that could facilitate the birth of a feminist society and of a common space of communist society. So this was a brief time, I think. It was the late 2008, where you have the Xenofeminist Manifesto and the Accelerationist Manifesto, a whole series of manifesto-like productions where the idea was that you could somehow hijack the direction that digital technologies were headed, which was that of becoming mass entertainment media, where people would spend all time scrolling the screen or posting content that would get monetized by corporation, but they could be used to change society, to change the economy, to change culture. And this, I think, possibly was a kind of return to 1980s, 1990s cyberfeminism, but with a new kind of edge, considering the transformation that had happened in the meanwhile. This was when you started hearing about ubiquitous computing, the Internet of Things, so the full automation of society that is underway. For some, it needed an intervention so that it would serve the needs or a different vision of the world. So this was the kind of feminist of the early 2010s. Okay, so we move on to the current moment, which is, I think, a challenging, but at the same time, a powerful moment. If you look back at that history, apart from the early age, apart when you had this connection between women and computers, there was then buried in the machine, but most of the kind of explicit feminist takes on the internet really had mostly the posture of the avant-garde. So it was like feminism was an avant-garde that went and trying to push the mainstream into taking a different form. You wanted to produce new ways, radical, transgressive approaches to technology. What we have now instead, I think it's a different type of situation, because we like it or not, or I think it hasn't been a bad development. Today's internet is a mass medium. Billions of people are connected from all kind of walks of life. So there's no longer the barriers to access, which used to be higher in the 1980s and 1990s. Who owned the computer? Most access was through computers, desktop computers. So you had to own a computer, you had to know how to operate a computer, how to switch it on. These were not things that most of the population could do. To a moment, which is today, where the large majority of the world population has smartphones with apps and access to tools for producing content, editing it, mixing it. People from all sorts of life have TikTok accounts. They make videos, they edit them, they make memes, they circulate it. They are on messaging groups, whether they are like WhatsApp or Signal or Snapchats. So digital communication is no longer for a small group, but it's a new mass medium. And I think this has also changed the kind of relationship of the position of feminism within this new context. Now, I'm happy that Jack Bradish is here in the audience. We're going to have a conversation about this tomorrow, because I agree with how he formulated the contemporary predicament. So what happened with this new situation, which is that, again,
the period in which, you know, the connection was, the network structure was what mattered, which has been replaced, as you argue also in your book, by the platform complex, which is what we are dealing with today. I want to briefly touch upon a couple of things that you didn't mention in your presentation, and then leave the floor for a discussion. One thing is, of course, you know, in AI, so there are feminist readings of AI that kind of reflect upon the issue that AI, which is something not new, because we know that it used to be developed in the 50s, then there was a break for a long time, and then it kind of came back now for specific reasons. And there are some feminist readings of AI arguing that it is part of this kind of backlash moment in which the white male, and not by chance all the prominent creators of AI, the companies, are all white men, right? So, and there is in this kind of backlash, so a coming back of the idea that, you know, okay, we're gonna take over the last capability that women have, which is to procreate. And not by chance, you know, also, it's a kind of envy of the uterus in a way. Even the name generative AI, so the ways in which it is represented, talked about in the media, kind of suggests that the generative power of women has been replaced by the machine. So this is about some kind of readings, feminist readings of AI, and I would like to get your take on it. But also femtech, which is, I think, also something very important to mention, because speaking of our generative power and, you know, our fluids, etc., femtech is a whole sector with billions of dollars that has completely appropriated the female body, datifying it, you know. And I bet that in this room, most of the people here do use femtech, basically, so tracking apps for menstruation, ovulation, etc., health-related things. So what's your take? Because it seems to me that we are also witnessing a moment in which, you know, our bodily functions are being outsourced to the machine, and we are increasingly relying on the machines also to tell us when we're gonna menstruate or when we are gonna ovulate, etc., etc. So even this kind of capability and connection with nature, and I know it's simplistic to say nature and technology. We do know that this binary is a fiction. However, it looks like femtech is increasingly appropriating everything that was completely regulated by our bodily functions and capitalizing on it. So this would be my questions about AI and femtech. You know.
Thank you, Donatella. I'm still kind of withholding answers on AI because I'm not sure I have enough. I have kind of studied enough. The whole scene, I think it's a moment where there is a lot of talk about AI, you know, there's a huge production of discourse, and that still confuses me. So, you know, I'm kind of holding back on that one. I mean, I know that the title generative AI gives this feeling, but, you know, I don't know. So I really would like to keep myself in a position of saying, okay, I need to listen more, I need to read more, I need to understand more about what are the implications for feminism of AI. Of course, we know, you know, that one of the models of AI is the servant, so it kind of falls into that tradition. So that definitely play into this. But I think there's something else at work at the moment. So you're right, the fact that it's not just a servant anymore, but it's generative. That's interesting, but I'm not sure about what that means yet. About femtech, I think I'm with a xenofeminist on that. So xenofeminism actually thought that femtech was something that feminists should be concerned with. So I wouldn't kind of think about technology as something that disconnects me from my body. I think that it also has the potential to make you connect to your body in different ways, and not necessarily in an appropriative kind of way. I think it has that potential. But then, these are also technologies that are developed by platform for the purposes of data extraction. So how they are informed by a genuine experimentation that involves young women, older women, into kind of developing a common knowledge of their bodies and sharing it. I'm sure that's not the direction they are being developed in, but I don't think it's about technology as such. I think it's a direction that has been given, the standardization of certain types of apps, and I think it's more about that.
Of course, I do think, I also don't believe that it's about technology as such. I do believe, though, that there is a trend which you also have been talking about, which is platformization of everything. That, of course, concerns also the appropriation of data, because I am concerned, for example, now in the United States, about the appropriation of the body data that can be used for political reasons. I'm sure, I'm thinking about abortion, for example.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are concerned about the appropriation and the breach of privacy, because this would be not the first time, right, that we witness such a privacy breach.
One of the chapters of the book, which was written in 2014, when I was actually participating in technological collectives that were engaged in trying to develop alternative infrastructure, was about that. How do we make technology into an infrastructure that support a different type of economy, one which is centered not around the accumulation of wealth and accumulation of profit by the few, but which actually sustains in the growth of collective intelligence, the transformation of our infrastructures of care. There was something there was at stake, and clearly the loss of that and the fact that the corporate platform has become the dominant model has been a huge loss, and we are not the better for it, for sure.
I want to leave the floor to people in the audience to ask questions to Tiziana. Or are you raising your hand? No? Not working? Can you answer from here and then take your...
From here?
See, I take this one.
It's because it was off. All right, thank you very much, Tiziana, for this talk. So one question that I have is this. It has to do with the economy of visibility. Of course, I don't want to take away anything from Jack, but the relationship between popular feminism and popular misogyny has been theorized by several scholars in feminist media studies. Particularly, I'm thinking about the work of Sarah Bennett-Weiser, of course. And I think something that is really important in that work is the emphasis on popular feminism has connected, tied, and made possible by an economy of visibility that has allowed popular feminism to emerge, and that has also allowed popular misogyny to emerge as a reaction to popular feminism. Now my question is this. What would happen if feminists would give up this economy of visibility and sort of invest in the Fediverse rather than in platforms? Is there some space there that has to be sort of opened up or cultivated, or that would be insufficient? or perhaps even a problematic move to sort of give up on the popular dimension of feminism up to a point?
Yeah, no, I understand. It's an important question. And on the other hand, you know, how do you become a feminist? That's also the question. How do you become a feminist? So do you come as a feminist to the internet, so to kind of platforms, and then acquire visibility, and then you say, okay, that's not good enough because I'm supporting the system, hence I need to move on to another technology? How you become a feminist by being in this, involved in this economy of visibility, you know, and then you kind of meet other people who think like you, and you start chatting, and maybe you start groups, and then you can maybe meet. So we live, I mean, the question of the alternative, of course, is a question that it's always in the background when we talk about internet critique. So there's been for many decades now, I mean, not many decades, the 2000, since the platform started, leave social media, abandon social media, invest in alternative infrastructures, leave X, don't go to Blue Sky, go to Mastodon. Mastodon doesn't work. Use RiseUp.net. RiseUp.net also doesn't work. So, you know, at the same time, there was an article by Cory Doctorow recently about Blue Sky saying, you know, we go from X to Blue Sky, and then, you know, Blue Sky is not the Fediverse, so we invest energy, and when they turn, we are left with nothing. And we have to leave, and we lose our contacts, our followers. So it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one, but I don't think there's going to be a mass exodus of feminists from, you know, mass media, because it's a question of the popular. They're so popular, these platforms. And there's still an avant-garde that is willing to pay the price of a badly functioning technology for the sake of independence, but then you lose. It's a very, you know, difficult question. I don't have an answer to that, but I think you become feminist today by being on these platforms. You don't come on platforms as a feminist with a mission.
There might be people here who may want.
Would you say that this phenomenon is mostly like, we could mostly notice it from an American perspective? Like, is it the same all over the world, like for example here in Italy, or is it changing a little?
I'm not sure, but I suspect, I think in the United States, you're right, you know, it's very strong, very visible, but I don't think it's just the United States. I had the opportunity, like, to supervise dissertation about North Africa, for example, where feminist influencers have emerged on Instagram who have broken many taboos about female sexuality and their body, and they also met, you know, strong reaction, a strong backlash as well. So I suspect that it's not just the United States, but I'm not, you know, because I speak English, you know, and I'm mostly exposed to English speaking. To text, to kind of critical theory in English. I can definitely see that, I know they're strong in the UK as well. There's many kind of, there's been much concern in the media in the UK about these influencers, male influencers who have, again, a lot of influence over young boys, on boys, and spreading this kind of misogyny online. So I suspect it's a widespread thing.
Speaking about the increase of online misogyny in the UK, how do you think we can have, is this on? how could we have a conversation about influencers like Andrew Tate and like Nick Fuentes in the United States without validating them and giving them the attention that they obviously want? So how can we discuss them without doing that?
I don't know about that. I really don't know. I think there is a issue such as I think that sorry, I keep going back to Jackie because I know there's a feminist, but he uses quite a lot of feminist media studies as well, and I've just recently, read his work very closely. But I think he's pointing out some strategies that platforms are putting in place, such as deplatformization. I think Jose van Dijk, as you pointed out, also has been writing about it. I think need to go back and understand how anti-fascist movements have dealt with fascism historically, because we call them misogynist, but they're also fascist. There's all it comes with a package, which means usually racist, misogynist, imperialist. It's not just a misogyny; it's usually connected to everything else. So how do you deal with that? Anti-fascism, historical, let's try to contain it. It doesn't look for a conversation, right? It's just trying to avoid. You have to avoid for the thing to spread. It's like something that you have to always try to keep at bay and try to take away its power. So I don't know about that. I'm not. I think it's a good question though, because then you're talking from the point of view of somebody who has to deal with that online, right? And what is it that you usually do when you meet that? What is your strategy?
This has been a topic for me for a writing course this whole semester, and so I've been discussing the impacts that it has in like schools in the UK. But as I've gone on writing, I've realized I don't want to talk about them anymore because I'm giving them the attention that they don't deserve, and
that's been a strategy, like trying to isolate them, trying to take away influencers from them. So more than engaging with them, it's about taking away their followers or, like incapacitating them to spread.
Well, thank you, first of all. I'm also particularly interested in this clash that you described between feminism and popular misogyny. And right now, and I think this day especially, I'm thinking about what we could do as women, but also I was thinking that when it comes to the online manosphere, I think that the internet, in a way, kind of exposed these behaviors that I also read one of your interviews briefly, and how you describe micro-fascist behaviors and you connect it to misogyny. And I thought it was interesting because it connects these, let's say, new misogyny to history in a way. And I think that maybe I'm more pessimistic, but when we talk about Andrew Tate or these new influencers, I think that the problem is that we think they are new and that the media is spreading these ideas because they generate profit out of it. But what if these kind of thoughts have always been there, and it is that through media platforms they make money out of it? I think that's the main issue. Maybe because I'm young, I don't really have this historical maybe perspective, but I always feel like the media is just a place where they make money and not really the issue. I don't know. What do you think?
Actually, there is something that I started with. I started with thinking about the internet and the transformation into the platform economy from an economic point of view. So I was interested about how platform managed to make money out of something that at the beginning it looked very difficult to monetize, right? So it was not to be taken for granted that a business model would be found where some owner or platform would make money out of misogynistic speech. Okay, So this was something to start with. They didn't start thinking, oh, you know, we're going to make money out of this. I think what happened in many cases was that these kind of expressions, when they started appearing in their platform, constituted a problem for them. Because they wanted to present themselves as mediators, neutral mediators. So we just give these technologies to people, and then we are not responsible for what they put up. Instead, they were, you know, they started being called into account. Why is it, you know, you YouTube, why are you letting people post this kind of content? Why are you giving space to hate speech? Why are you letting this circulate? So I don't think it was just, it's just so simple, like they say, okay, there's an opportunity to make money here, so, you know, we'll give them space. It was something that when happened, you know, it became a problem for them. It was like, because they were called, held accountable for that kind of content on the platform. So, and that caused them to develop, like corporate platforms, tools such as algorithmic regulation, moderation, censorship, you know, like flagging, reporting content. So the appearance of these dynamics, which I call like the oppositional social and the backlash, is something that has caused platforms to develop techniques of government of users' activity, which were not there to start with. So I think it had that effect.
Thanks. Thanks, Tiziana. I'm going to have a question for you about swarms. But before I get there, if I might want to maybe riff a little bit on what people have said. By starting with the idea, it's even about femtech, and it'll get to what to do about online misogyny that's not technological anymore in the same way. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so like even to me, it's part of the issue is how do we know ourselves? How do we give a platform, a technology, a way, or the kind of credence and trust that it knows us better than us, than our friends, than our families, than strangers in our life. I mean, and that's whether it's about your ovulation cycle, it's about the For You page on TikTok that tells me I have ADHD, right? I mean, it's the way that people discover themselves, right? So that was one part. It's like, where do we turn to talk to people? And so, and to get to know ourselves as either feminists or people just struggling with things. So I think you're totally right about like, how do we stop giving these guys so much attention and attention power? I think for me, and this is why the micro is in there, it's how that trickles down to everyday life. So to think about who are the people, who are the boys in your life who either explicitly or implicitly take in those ideas, whether or not they follow Tate or not. I'll cite Sarah Benny-Weiser also. Her other book, her more recent book, co-authored, is called Unbelievable, and it's about the long-term and recent ways that women's credibility have been undermined, right? All the time, right? That don't trust women. So that's a thing that's happening in everyday life that gets articulated by people like, you know, Tate and Fuentes in a more kind of aggressive, misogynistic way. So there's a way to, okay, this is how I would say, the hope I have is that people women are still having, you know, dorm room conversations. They're still having, you know, squad-based support networks, right? That is the place to go to, you know, not allow all of that stuff that's happening online to enter into everyday life in that way. So I think, but people are struggling, and historically, I think the history is also learning, like the history of women fighting against this as well, and finding that history in addition to the history of a deep-seated misogyny. So those are riffs. I took a lot of time. I'm wondering also about swarms, that moment of the internet that was so exciting that you've written about, that I was right, the way that the noise part, the way that the surprise and the unexpected collective things that could happen on the internet. I mean, not just the kind of more placid, participatory, we all have a voice, but like the things that just went askew, right? Like, do you see any, I mean, was that more or less been squashed by platforms, or is there a way to still see the, you know, the unpredictable and the swerve? That's what I was trying to get at. You wrote about the swerve a number of times. Do you think there are swerves?
I think there are all the time. I still, you know, when I was doing research for this new book, not the one that has been published and translated, but the one I'm working on, it was all about control, right? I got into this because most of the literature about the internet is about control or platforms. It's about the governors or the controllers, how they get our data. So, you know, I was suffocating, right? Because it was all, you know, you can describe how power works in great detail. And then I realized about, you know, why I say so keen on control if it is not because there's something fleeing, escaping. Users are extremely antagonistic towards platforms. They're really hostile. You know, in many cases they don't leave just because they don't want to lose, you know, it's a kind of inertia. And there's protests, riots, movements, all the time. I think was a turning point for me was also Nick Dyer-Witheford's research on riot platforms, where he showed, you know, with data, that there's never been as many protests and riots and rebellions and you know, upsurges of activity now since the 60s. Now they've been dismissed by social movement theorists. There's been short-termish, not having power, but they're endemic. Now, if you say that microfascism is dangerous because it starts from every day, you know, and that's the kind of raw material out of which, like, the big political movements or figures like Trump managed to win the election. There is also this kind of pervasiveness of infra-political, to borrow a term from Robin Kelly, you know, the race rebels, this kind of infra-political forms of rebellion and resistance and fugitivity. All of this, you know, if they didn't have that problem, they wouldn't be so constantly engaged in how to try to control this. You know, billions of people who can, anybody at any moment could post. The swarm can start anytime. Nobody was, I think, expecting the kind of anti-colonial pro-Palestinian movement to be so strong online. There have been a massive investment in online propaganda to make the Palestinian point of view unspeakable, and this still happened. So my point now is that oppositional forces are a powerful force, and you can see that. I'm quoting Robin Kelly, the African-American historian. You can understand the threat that something represents from the amount of energy that the other side is putting into keeping it under control. And there's a lot of energy being put into keeping online communication under control. Now that it's no longer just a minority, but it's billions of people who are using it every day. Yeah. That's I still think, when I still think about it, I know that many of you are in this room for chronological reason. I don't like the term generation. I think it's a way to distract us from the real important division hierarchy, which are about socioeconomic class and other things. But it's mind-boggling what's happening in the last 10, 15 years. Until 10 years ago, people were still talking about the digital divide. And now you got influencers, coming from the slums of Santo Domingo, right? They're like the biggest influencers online. Who would have thought that people would just... And this was something that Frantz Fanon noticed. When Frantz Fanon, I think you know about Fanon, right? It's a key figure of the anti-colonial movement, a Martinican French psychiatrist who wrote Black Skin, White Mask and The Wretched of the Earth. He also wrote this essay about radio during the anti-colonial war in Algeria, saying the French thought the Algerians in the 1940s were too backward and traditionalist to accept radio. So they say, these people are not technologically oriented, but that was because the radio in Algeria was in French. It was the voice of the oppressor. As soon as the first radio station in Arabic started, broadcasting knew about rebellion, they got the latest gear. Like this really traditional household, had the most advanced technological equipment because they were interested in what was on the radio. And that's also what happened, I think, with digital technologies.
I think this was actually a great ending note, Tiziana. I want to thank you for being with us today, and
thank you for having me.
Yes, a big round of applause for Tiziana. And this is also a conclusion of our Digital Delights and Disturbances for this season. I want to thank Roberto Ronzulli and Brian Thompson from the Media Lab, who have been amazing and live streaming all the talks. And thank you for being with us tonight.